That orange roof was visible from a quarter-mile down the highway. You did not even need a sign. If you drove anywhere in America between the 1950s and the early 1980s, you already knew what it meant. Howard Johnson's. A laminated menu, a waitress who called you Han, and a coffee pot that never stopped. Number 17 on this list kept the entire chain alive for 2 decades, and most people today have never even tried it. Number 9 quietly disappeared from every location without a single word of explanation. These were the meals that fed a generation of American road trips, and when the last Howard Johnson's finally closed, they vanished with it. So hit subscribe, because here are 25 forgotten Howard Johnson's roadside meals that have vanished over time. Number 25, Cheese Dreams. This was not a grilled cheese, and Howard Johnson's never called it one. A thick slice of sharp American cheddar laid across white toast, slid under the broiler until the edges curled and the top blistered gold. Some locations added a strip of bacon underneath. Others spread a thin layer of yellow mustard before the cheese went on. You got a pickle spear on the side and a handful of ridged potato chips, and the whole plate ran less than $1 well into the 1960s. It was the kind of thing kids ordered without even glancing at the menu because they already knew it was there, and it came out fast enough that the family was back on the highway before anyone got restless. When Howard Johnson started cutting corners on the cheese in the mid-1970s, this was one of the first items that stopped tasting right. Number 24, Baked Cod Dinner. A white fillet, lightly seasoned, baked in a shallow dish with butter and a dusting of breadcrumbs on top. It came with a lemon wedge, a side of coleslaw, and either mashed potatoes or a baked potato in foil. This was the Friday night plate at hundreds of Howard Johnson's locations across New England and the Mid-Atlantic, back when a full fish dinner at a sit-down restaurant was still something a working family could afford without thinking twice. The cod was mild enough for children and filling enough for their fathers after a long drive. If you pulled off the turnpike on a Friday evening in 1963 and saw that orange roof, there was a good chance the hostess already had the cod dinner circled on the specials board before you sat down. Before I go any further, for the folks who want all of this, the forgotten recipes I keep coming back to on this channel, the ones your grandmother made and never wrote down, all gathered in one place, I put them together in the Vintage Recipe Guide at my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not push it again in this video. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 23, Chicken in a Basket. 3 or 4 pieces of golden fried chicken stacked in a wicker basket lined with wax paper, with French fries piled around them and a small cup of coleslaw tucked to the side. Howard Johnson's breaded their chicken in a seasoned flour coating and fried it until the crust crackled when you bit through. This was not Southern fried chicken, and it was not trying to be. It was highway fried chicken, crispy and hot, built for a family that had been in the car since breakfast and needed to eat before the next 200 miles. The basket was the whole point. It made a roadside meal feel like a picnic, and kids loved it because the basket made the food feel like theirs. Number 22, Chopped Sirloin Steak Dinner. This was a hamburger that refused to call itself one. A thick oval patty of ground sirloin, seasoned and broiled, served on a hot plate with a baked potato and a side of green beans. No bun, no ketchup, no pickles. The whole presentation said this was a proper dinner, not a sandwich you ate with your hands. Howard Johnson's charged a premium for it compared to the regular hamburger, and travelers who wanted something that felt like a proper sit-down steak dinner without the price or the long wait ordered it by the thousands every single week across the chain. The chopped sirloin vanished from most roadside menus by the early 1980s, replaced by cheaper preformed patties that nobody pretended were anything other than what they were. There was a time when you could drive from Maine to Florida and never once eat somewhere unfamiliar. The orange roof of a Howard Johnson's was a contract with the American driver. It said the food would taste exactly the same in Connecticut as it did in Virginia. The menu would be identical. The booths would be the same turquoise vinyl. The ice cream would come in the same 28 flavors. Howard Deering Johnson built his empire on one idea: that a family 300 miles from home should never have to wonder what they were about to eat. That was the promise. and for 30 years it held. What most people never think about is what happened to the meals when the promise broke. They did not go to other restaurants. They did not get passed down or written into cookbooks. They simply stopped existing because the only place they ever lived was under that orange roof. Number 21. Deviled crab, a mixture of crab meat, breadcrumbs, egg, Worcestershire sauce, and a sharp hit of dry mustard, packed into a real crab shell and baked until the top browned and cracked. Howard Johnson served this as both an appetizer and a main course depending on the location, and on the coast, you got 2 shells on the plate instead of 1. The seasoning was aggressive for its era. Most chain restaurants in the 1960s played it safe with their seafood, keeping everything mild and buttered so nobody would send it back, but the deviled crab had enough mustard and ground pepper to remind you that somebody in that kitchen actually wanted you to taste something. It was one of the first dishes cut when the chain simplified its menu in the late 1970s because crab was expensive, and nobody was making the drive to Howard Johnson's specifically to eat it. Number 20. Friday fish fry platter. Every Friday, Howard Johnson's locations from the Midwest to the Eastern Seaboard ran a fish fry special that packed the dining room from 5 o'clock onward. A generous portion of battered haddock or cod, deep fried until the coating shattered when your fork touched it, served with tartar sauce, lemon, a mound of French fries, and coleslaw. In Catholic towns across Pennsylvania, New York, and New England, this was the Friday meal, and there was no discussion about where to go. Whole families drove to Howard Johnson's on Friday the way they drove to church on Sunday, out of habit, and because the fish was consistently good. The platter was big enough to split between 2 children, and most parents did exactly that. When the chain shrank its portions in the 1970s and the fish got thinner while the batter got thicker, families stopped coming on Fridays first. That was the warning sign. When Friday went quiet, the rest of the week followed. Number 19. Breaded veal cutlet. A thin piece of veal, pounded flat, dredged in egg and seasoned breadcrumbs, and pan-fried until the coating turned deep gold. Howard Johnson's served it with a side of spaghetti and red sauce and a warm dinner roll, which made the whole plate feel more like a neighborhood Italian restaurant than a highway chain. Veal was still affordable in the 1950s and 1960s, and a breaded cutlet was one of the few dishes on the menu that felt like somebody's mother had actually cooked it. By the mid-1970s, veal prices climbed and the chain quietly swapped in a breaded pork cutlet that looked similar on the plate but did not taste like anything worth remembering. Most customers never said a word about the switch. They just stopped ordering it. Number 18. Baked Virginia ham dinner. A thick slab of baked ham with a glaze made from brown sugar, dry mustard, and pineapple juice, served with scalloped potatoes and a side of green peas. This was the Sunday dinner plate at Howard Johnson's, the meal families ordered when they wanted something that felt like home but did not want to cook it themselves. The ham came pre-sliced in the kitchen, thick enough that you could see the smoke ring at the edge, and the glaze had a sweetness that lingered on your lips. Howard Johnson's sourced their hams from Virginia suppliers for decades, and the quality held steady enough that regular travelers knew exactly what to expect before the plate arrived. It tasted better on the road than it ever did at home, because the road was the only place you let somebody else carve the ham for you. Number 17. Fried clam strips plate. This was not just a menu item. This was the reason Howard Johnson's existed. In 1925, Howard Deering Johnson borrowed money to buy a small patent medicine store in Quincy, Massachusetts, and started selling ice cream from a soda fountain. The ice cream brought people through the door, but it was the fried clams that turned a soda counter into an empire. By the late 1930s, Johnson had figured out how to buy clams in massive quantities from the beds off the coast of Ipswich, Massachusetts, and fry them in a proprietary batter that stayed crispy even after sitting on the plate for 10 minutes. Every single Howard Johnson's restaurant in the country served the exact same fried clam strips, from the same recipe out of the same centralized kitchen operation. The clams were tender inside and shattering crisp outside, piled high on a paper-lined plate with French fries, coleslaw, and a cup of tartar sauce. For millions of Americans, this plate was the taste of summer vacation. You ate it in a turquoise booth with your family still sunburned from the beach. and the grease on your fingers was part of the memory. Families drove 50 miles out of their way for it. There are letters in old newspaper archives from travelers who planned their entire road trips around Howard Johnson's clam strip stops. When the chain started cutting costs in the 1970s, they switched from Ipswich belly clams to cheaper Pacific clam strips, and the regulars noticed on the first bite. The new clams were rubbery and bland, and no amount of batter could hide it. There was no announcement, no apology, just a different clam on the plate and a loyalty that cracked right down the middle. The fried clam strip plate was on the menu for over 80 years. When the last Howard Johnson's in Lake George, New York finally closed, it had nowhere left to go. Number 16. Turkey croquettes with mushroom sauce. These were the Monday special at most Howard Johnson's locations, and they existed for one reason: leftover turkey. Ground turkey mixed with celery, onion, and a thick bechamel, shaped into cylinders, breaded, and deep-fried until the outside turned dark and crunchy. They came two to a plate, sitting in a pool of mushroom cream sauce with mashed potatoes on the side. The croquette was already an old-fashioned dish by the 1960s, and Howard Johnson's was one of the last chains still serving them. There was something almost Victorian about the whole effort. This careful work of turning yesterday's leftovers into something that looked like today's meal. Most people who ate turkey croquettes at Howard Johnson's never knew they were eating reheated turkey, and that was exactly the point. In 1956, President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act and changed the way America ate. The new interstate highways were faster, wider, and designed to bypass every small town and roadside business that had grown up along the old two-lane routes. Howard Johnson's had built its empire along those older highways, where travelers had no choice but to stop. The interstates gave them a choice, and the choice was speed. Rest stops replaced restaurants. Vending machines replaced waitresses. A generation of meals that had been cooked in real kitchens and served on real plates gave way to food wrapped in paper and eaten with one hand on the steering wheel. Nobody voted to end the Howard Johnson's way of eating. The highway just made it irrelevant, and the meals that lived inside those orange-roofed buildings had no way to follow the traffic to the new road. Number 15. Broiled Boston Scrod. A young cod or haddock fillet, split and broiled with butter and a light dusting of paprika, served on a hot oval plate with lemon, boiled potatoes, and a small dish of drawn butter. The word scrod confused half the customers who ordered it. It was not a species. It was a size. A young and small cod, tender enough to fall apart if you looked at it wrong. Howard Johnson's served it with a side of their brown bread, and in the coastal towns north of Boston, this was what the locals ordered instead of the clam strips. The tourists ate clams. The regulars ate scrod. When the chain began sourcing cheaper fish from overseas and dropped the Boston designation, the scrod plate lost the only thing that had made it special. Number 14. Roast turkey dinner with all the trimmings. If there was one meal that proved Howard Johnson's understood its customers better than any other chain in America, it was this plate. A thick slice of roasted turkey breast carved in the back kitchen, laid across the plate with a ladle of hot gravy poured right over the top. Next to it, a scoop of sage stuffing, a mound of mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and a dinner roll still warm from the oven. This was Thanksgiving dinner on a Tuesday night in April, and that was the entire point. Millions of Americans traveling the highway ate alone or with a carload of tired children, hundreds of miles from anyone who would have cooked them a proper dinner. The roast turkey plate was not food. It was the feeling of sitting down somewhere that somebody had gone to the trouble. Howard Johnson's prepared the turkey in large batches, roasting whole birds every morning and slicing breast meat throughout the day. By the dinner service, the slices were always drier than the ones carved at lunch, and regulars knew to arrive early. But even the late afternoon turkey was better than anything at the vending machines in the new interstate rest stops. A plate of turkey and cranberry sauce at a Howard Johnson's in 1962 was a promise that the road had not taken everything away. You could still sit in a clean booth with a real fork and a cloth napkin and eat a meal your mother would have recognized. That is not a small thing when you are 600 miles from home. Nobody carves whole turkeys for highway travelers anymore. Not because the recipe was difficult, but because the idea stopped making financial sense sometime around 1978, and nothing replaced it. Number 13. Baked stuffed shrimp platter. 4 or 5 large butterflied shrimp, each one stuffed with a mixture of buttered breadcrumbs, garlic, and parsley, baked in a shallow dish until the stuffing turned golden and the shrimp curled tight. They came arranged on an oval plate with a wedge of lemon and a side of rice pilaf. This was the dressy meal at Howard Johnson's, the one you ordered when you were celebrating something on the road or trying to impress the person sitting across the booth from you. It was not cheap by roadside standards, and ordering it felt like a small occasion all by itself. The stuffing recipe was identical at every location across the country, which meant a plate of stuffed shrimp in Annapolis, Maryland tasted exactly like one in Columbus, Ohio. That consistency was the whole architecture of the chain, and it held right up until the day it did not. Number 12. London broil. A thick slab of marinated flank steak, broiled at high heat and sliced thin against the grain, fanned out across the plate with a baked potato and green beans. London broil was never a cut of beef. It was a method. You took a cheap, tough piece of meat and treated it right, and it gave you something that tasted like it cost 3 times what it did. Howard Johnson's offered it as a dinner special, and it was one of the few items on the menu that felt like it belonged in a proper steakhouse rather than a highway restaurant. The meat arrived pre-marinated from the central kitchen, and the marinade recipe was one of the few things corporate never shared, not even with the franchise operators who made it every night. Number 11. Fried shrimp platter. A heap of breaded shrimp piled on a plate with cocktail sauce, French fries, and coleslaw. The shrimp were coated in the same light breadcrumb batter the chain used for nearly everything it fried, a thin, seasoned shell that cracked cleanly when you bit through it. This was the meal for the traveler who could not decide between fish and something hearty, and it solved both problems without any compromise. Children loved it because each shrimp was its own small bite, something they could eat with their fingers while their parents told them to use a fork. The shrimp came in a generous pile, and the cocktail sauce was sharp with horseradish in a way that the bottled kind at home never managed. When frozen breaded shrimp became available in every grocery store by the late 1970s, the restaurant version lost its reason to exist. Why drive to a Howard Johnson's for something you could pull from a bag? A meal at Howard Johnson's took 45 minutes to an hour. You sat in a booth, ordered from a waitress, waited for food to arrive on a real plate, ate with metal utensils, and left a tip on the table. Nobody was in a hurry. The restaurant was designed to slow you down, which is the opposite of what the modern highway wants. Today, a roadside meal is something you unwrap from paper with one hand while driving. The meal at Howard Johnson's was something you sat down for, and the sitting was part of it. The chair, the plate, the fact that somebody brought you your food and called you by a name. When that disappeared, it was not just the meals that vanished. It was the idea that eating on the road could still feel like eating at home. Number 10. Ham steak with pineapple ring. A thick cross-section of smoked ham seared on a flat grill until the edges caramelized, served with a ring of canned pineapple on top that had been warmed in its own juice until it turned soft and sweet. This came with a side of sweet potatoes or scalloped potatoes depending on the region. The combination of salty ham and warm pineapple was pure mid-century American cooking, a flavor pairing that food writers today would call retro, but your grandmother just called Tuesday supper. Howard Johnson's was one of the few chains in the country that served ham steaks every single day of the week, not just as an Easter or holiday special. The pineapple ring sitting on top of the ham was the signature. It told you this was the Howard Johnson's version of a ham dinner and nobody else's. Number 9. Broiled lamb chops dinner. 2 or 3 small rib chops, broiled with nothing but salt and melted butter, served on a hot plate with mint jelly, a baked potato, and peas. Lamb was a common restaurant meat in America through the 1960s. It showed up on menus at diners, hotel dining rooms, and roadside chains without anyone thinking twice. Howard Johnson served it as a mid-priced dinner, and the chops were popular enough to hold their spot on the menu for over 20 years. Then, sometime in the early 1970s, they vanished. No printed notice, No explanation on the updated menu. The lamb simply stopped appearing, replaced by something cheaper. If you ask anyone who worked at Howard Johnson's kitchen back then, most will tell you the same thing. The wholesale price climbed, and the customers did not follow it up. Number 8. New England clam roll. A soft, split-top hot dog bun filled with Howard Johnson's fried clam strips and served with a small cup of tartar sauce on the side. This was the handheld version of the clam strip plate, built for the lunch counter crowd who wanted to eat quickly and get back on the highway. The bun was always toasted on the flat sides, buttered and grilled until it had a slight crunch, and the clams were packed in so tightly that they stuck out of both ends. Coastal locations in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Maine moved hundreds of these a day during the summer months, and on a hot Saturday in July, there would be a line at the counter 3 people deep just for clam rolls. It was a beach meal, a car meal, a meal you ate standing in the parking lot while your kids ran across the gravel with ice cream cones already dripping down their wrists. Number 7. Beef pot pie. A deep individual baking dish filled with chunks of braised beef, diced carrots, peas, pearl onions, and potatoes in a thick brown gravy, sealed under a golden puff pastry top and baked until the crust browned and the filling bubbled through the cracks. Howard Johnson's offered both chicken and beef versions, and the beef outsold the chicken at most locations by a wide margin. The crust came from the central kitchen, shipped frozen and laid over the filling before baking to order. When you cracked through that pastry lid with your fork and the steam rose up into your face, you forgot you were sitting in a restaurant off the highway. It smelled like a kitchen that had been cooking all afternoon. The beef pot pie was one of the heaviest meals on the menu, and nobody who ordered one ever complained about being hungry an hour later. Number 6. Lobster roll. Cold lobster meat, roughly chopped and tossed with a small amount of mayonnaise and a squeeze of lemon, packed into a buttered and toasted split-top roll. Howard Johnson's locations in New England served this as a summer special, and in the 1960s the price was still modest enough that a working family could order one without doing math first. The lobster came from the same suppliers who sold to local clam shacks along the coast, and the roll was the same split-top bun used for the clam rolls and the frankfurters. What made the Howard Johnson's version stand apart was the temperature. The lobster was always cold, the roll always warm. That contrast was the whole experience. Cold, sweet meat on a hot, crisp bun, and it never tasted like fast food. Number 5. Seafood combination plate. Fried clam strips, fried shrimp, and a piece of baked or fried fish arranged together on one plate with French fries, coleslaw, tartar sauce, and lemon. This was the meal for the traveler who could not choose, and Howard Johnson's made the decision easy. You got a sample of everything the kitchen did best, all at once. The combination plate was quietly one of the highest margin items on the menu because the individual portions were smaller than what you would get ordering each dish alone. But nobody felt shortchanged. The plate looked generous, the variety kept things interesting, and the act of picking between 3 different fried things made the meal feel like more than the sum of its parts. When the seafood quality dropped in the late 1970s, the combination plate was the first to suffer because there were 3 things on it that could go wrong instead of 1. Number 4. Roast sirloin of beef dinner. Thick slices of slow-roasted beef, pink in the center, laid across the plate with a side of au jus, a baked potato, and creamed spinach. This was the meal businessmen ordered at Howard Johnson's motor lodges after a long day on the road when they did not want to find another restaurant. The roast was prepared each morning and held warm through the dinner service, carved to order at the kitchen station. Howard Johnson's treated the roast sirloin as a prestige dish, pricing it near the top of the menu and presenting it with a care that most highway restaurants never attempted. Steak knives showed up on the table. The au jus arrived in a separate dish. The whole experience told you that even on the road, you could still eat like you were somewhere that mattered. Number 3. Buttermilk pancake platter. 3 thick buttermilk pancakes cooked on a flat griddle until the bubbles set and the edges turned gold, stacked on a heavy plate with a pat of butter melting into the top one and a small pitcher of warm maple-flavored syrup on the side. Bacon or sausage links came with it, and a cup of Howard Johnson's coffee that tasted the same in Georgia as it did in Maine. This was the road trip breakfast, the meal that started a day of driving before the interstate system turned breakfast into something you grabbed through a window. Families sat in turquoise booths at 7 in the morning with sunlight coming through plate glass, eating pancakes with silverware while the car cooled in the parking lot. Kids poured too much syrup. Fathers studied the road map. Mothers ordered a second coffee. Nobody was in a rush because the highway was 2 lanes and there was no making good time. That platter was the last quiet meal of the morning before the American road got fast. Number 2. Tenderloin tips on buttered toast. Cubes of beef tenderloin, seared and braised in a rich brown gravy with mushrooms and onions, spooned over thick slices of buttered white toast. This was the weeknight dinner plate at Howard Johnson's, the meal that tasted like it took hours, even though the kitchen assembled it in minutes from prep done that morning. The tenderloin tips were soft enough to cut with the side of a fork, and the gravy soaked into the toast until the bread half dissolved and the whole thing became one warm, unified bite. It was not elegant. It was better than that. It was the kind of meal that made a Formica table in a highway restaurant feel like your mother's kitchen for exactly as long as it took to clean the plate. Howard Johnson's served tenderloin tips for decades, and the dish remained on the menu long after fancier entrees had come and gone. Some things survive not because they are special, but because they are exactly right. Number 1. Grilled in butter Frankfurter plate. A plump, all-beef Frankfurter, split down the middle and grilled slowly in real butter on a flat-top griddle until the skin blistered and the edges crisped, served in a toasted split-top bun with French fries and a small cup of baked beans. This was the children's meal, the one every kid who ever rode in the back seat of a station wagon remembers. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was perfect. Howard Johnson's made their own Frankfurters with a higher beef content than any commercial hot dog on the market. The butter on the griddle was not a shortcut. It was the recipe. And the sound of that Frankfurter sizzling flat side down on a buttered grill was the sound of finally stopping, of sitting in a cool booth after hours of highway heat. Every meal on this list vanished because the chain that served it vanished. But this is the one people mention first, not the clam strips, not the ice cream. The Frankfurter you ate when you were 7 years old, the best thing you had ever tasted, before you knew that things like that could disappear. If you keep on heading towards the southwest, you'll eventually come across diners with deals for Frito pies. You might wonder what that even is, and that's what I'm here to explain to you. So you see, there was this woman known as Daisy Doolin, whose son made Fritos in the first place. Charles Elmer Doolin had a pretty potent recipe for success when he first stumbled onto how to make a Frito corn chip in the 1930s, but it wasn't until his mom took the chips and beef chili and put it all together in a bowl that the Frito pie was first born. Yeah, I know, false advertising, right? It's not really a pie. But do we care for semantics in the face of such a culinary star? I wouldn't care much for labeling. You could call it a mimosa, and I think I'd still down several bowls of Frito pies in one go, and I know that's a sentiment a lot of Americans out there can share. Eventually, people started adding shredded cheese and chopped onions, olives, jalapenos, sour cream, and all sorts of condiments and toppings to the typical bowl to really give it some variety and flexibility as a dish. It worked too, since while it was already affordable at under $1 at most diners, it was now also really accessible. More than it originally was, you could throw anything into the bowl alongside the beef and Frito chips. Experimentative food really is the best. It's like Russian roulette but with calories. Did you just waste yours? Are you maybe about to strike gold? You'll never know until you get cooking. Number 17. Grasshopper pie. If the dessert case had a slice of something pale mint green behind the glass, this was it. It borrowed everything from the grasshopper cocktail that swept through after the war. White creme de cacao and creme de menthe whipped into cream and set into a chocolate cookie crust. The color alone sold it, that soft green nobody else on the menu could match. It was cool and minty and a little grown up, the dessert you ordered to feel fancy at the end of a roadside meal. Diners loved it because it took no baking, just chilling, so a busy kitchen could keep slices ready in the cooler all day. For a stretch in the 1960s, it was everywhere. the height of dinner party sophistication served right off the highway. But the mint and chocolate fad cooled, and the boozy, retro look started to seem dated. Newer desserts crowded it out of the case. Today, that distinctive green slice is almost impossible to find, gone with the era that thought it was the last word in elegance. Snow cream was winter's first dessert, made the moment fresh snow fell clean and white across farmhouse yards and fields. Children rushed outside with bowls and spoons, scooping pristine snow before it could be touched or walked upon. Mothers added cream, sugar, and vanilla, stirring quickly before the snow could melt completely. The result was something between ice cream and sorbet, light and fluffy with crystals dissolved instantly. Some families added maple syrup or honey instead of white sugar with variations that tasted like frozen forests. Others stirred in cocoa powder or berry preserves saved from summer. The dessert had to be eaten immediately, served in bowls at kitchen tables while wind howled outside. In Appalachian communities and northern farmsteads, snow cream meant celebration, turning brutal weather into joy. Families gathered around tables, laughing as they ate before the treat melted back to liquid. The tradition taught children that winter's harshness could provide pleasure. Modern health warnings about pollution have ended this practice, but for generations, snow cream was winter magic served cold. Children remember the excitement, the race to gather fresh powder before anyone walked through pristine whiteness covering farmhouse yards. If you were going for a bucket of chicken, you definitely needed a shake. I mean, come on, it's a no-brainer of a combo, right? The two things you always get a good shake with are burgers and fried chicken. That was true back then too, and there was no better shake than the orange creamsicle. The flavor known as creamsicle was actually made in the 1920s by a company of the same name, and it caught on like a disease with people. Frozen orange and vanilla, who would have thought? If you held a gun to my head and asked me if that would sell hundreds of thousands, then I'd just laugh. By the 1960s, though, it had sold enough that it actually managed to build up nostalgia with its customers. The creamsicle was added to drive-ins throughout the 50s and 60s as an attempt to capitalize on that nostalgia for fans who were there for its birth in the 20s and for teens who were buying loads of chicken buckets. It went great with all kinds of food that was popular with the youth anyway. A bucket, your friends, some shakes and fries, that's a pretty close second to the American dream. Plus, if you got a bucket and the shake to go with it, you were looking at maybe $1.25 or $2.25 in total. The shake itself was for 25 or 75 cents in most places, and it was also extremely popular in hotter areas like Arizona and California. I mean, California wasn't hot enough for fires to erupt randomly back then, but you could still work up a real sweat, and the best way to deal with that summer heat was a frozen creamsicle. Number 18, creamed chipped beef on toast. Servicemen had a saltier name for it, but on the menu it read plain and honest. Thin slices of dried salted beef got stirred into a roux of butter, flour, and milk, then spooned thick over toast with a little cayenne for bite. It started as depression food, the kind of meal you made when the pantry was nearly bare, and it became a fixture in military mess halls during the war. Soldiers came home with a taste for it, and diners were happy to serve it cheap for the breakfast crowd. For a couple of decades, it was a working man's morning plate, filling and salty and warm. But it never escaped its reputation. As chain restaurants spread and breakfast got built around eggs and pancakes, the creamed beef started to feel like leftover army food nobody missed. The counters dropped it one by one. A handful of old-school spots still make it, but for most Americans, it vanished off the breakfast board decades ago. Dried corn soup used summer's abundance to feed winter months, made from corn kernels dried on strings hung from rafters. Women cut kernels from fresh ears at peak ripeness, strung them like beads, and hung them to dry until they rattled like stones. In winter, handfuls of these kernels were soaked overnight, then simmered with ham hocks, potatoes, and milk until tender. The corn rehydrated into something richer than fresh, concentrated and almost sweet, thickening the soup naturally. Farm families ate this by the bowlful, often as a complete meal with cornbread on the side. In Pennsylvania, Dutch communities in the Northeast, dried corn soup represented wisdom and foresight, August's plenty transformed into February's sustenance. The preparation required planning months in advance, space in kitchens for hanging corn, and knowledge passed between generations. Children helped string kernels, learning preservation techniques that would sustain them later. The soup tasted distinctly different from fresh corn dishes, earthier and more complex. The soup's preparation was seasonal ritual, marking transition from fresh summer eating to preserved winter stores that sustained families through months of cold. I can't explain why his first name is Tiny, but Tiny Naylor was a Californian restaurateur who made one really important contribution to the cultural zeitgeist of America. That was the Patty Melt burger, which was one of the first times a sandwich and a hamburger were combined to make a hybrid. It was done in the 40s and 50s, so it wasn't exactly too welcomed at first because fusion food hadn't taken off much as a concept. When people did start giving it a shot after it appeared in his Los Angeles fast food chains, though, it took over the nation. A patty melt craze was dominating the entirety of the United States. Don't ever underestimate the power a well-seasoned beef patty can hold. Drive-in diners had lines of cars waiting for the divine chance to get their hands on this angelic combination of rye bread, caramelized onions, and Swiss cheese. Sounds simple enough, right? Throughout the Midwest and East Coast, this burger carved a legacy for itself that almost none matched if we talk about the rest of the burgers that were coming out in that time period. It certainly put a Big Mac to shame. Plus, it got really popular with German-American communities because they already were deep believers in rye bread-based burgers. The West Coast, on the other hand, experimented with some other flavors, such as different styles of seasonings, but the patty melt did just as well there too. Diners even used to have Melt Mondays, where a patty melt burger, fries, and shake combo would go on a discount. Number 22, macaroni and stewed tomatoes. This is the one that disappeared the day the interstate bypassed Main Street. It was about as plain as a blue plate special ever got, just boiled macaroni stirred into canned tomatoes, maybe a knob of butter and a little sugar to round it out. It came up through the Depression because it cost almost nothing, and small-town diners kept ladling it out for decades because regulars asked for it by name. It was a dish for the kind of place where the cook knew your order before you sat down. Then the new highway came through, and the cars stopped pulling off at the old downtown stretch. The travelers who would have wandered in for a cheap plate now blew past on the bypass toward the chains near the on-ramp. Those little counters could not survive on locals alone, and one by one, they shuttered. The macaroni went dark with them, a humble plate that needed a slow road and a steady door to stay alive. You will not find it on a menu now. Beef heart braised with vegetables turned organ meat into tender winter dinner, economical and nourishing. The heart was cleaned, trimmed, and stuffed with bread and herb dressing, then braised for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes. The long cooking made the dense muscle tender, while stuffing absorbed meat juices and vegetable flavors. Farmhouse families served this at Sunday dinners, the large heart feeding 8 or more people from meat that cost little. In communities that practiced nose-to-tail eating, beef heart represented normal food rather than poverty meal. Nose-to-tail eating wasn't philosophical choice, but practical necessity. Yet the resulting dishes proved that skillful cooking honored animals by using everything they provided to sustain human families through winter. So let's say you were in one of those super hot states and you just didn't feel like greasing up your day to hell and back with all those fried fats and oils? Chicken buckets definitely weren't for you, but a frozen shake just wasn't cutting it either. You needed a real dessert, so what would you go for? Let me introduce you to the apple pie a la mode, which actually goes all the way back to the 1900s. The story goes something like this. Apparently, a New York diner once served a customer who combined their ice cream with the pie. This inspired the idea behind apple pie a la mode. It slowly started becoming a niche way of having a pie that slowly exploded in popularity and found itself some real dedicated fans, and by the 1960s, Americans were fully in their bag with all kinds of food experimentation and pairing warm desserts with cold sides. Another big reason why this pie was such a nightmare for its competitors was because it was priced literally the same as one of those creamsicle shakes we just talked about. You get a pie and ice cream to go with it for 75 cents, and it doesn't take a nuclear physicist to figure out how a business model like that goes nationwide. The apple pie was already something deeply rooted in American culture anyway, so this neat little variation only helped cement its legacy further. Also, the idea itself is just genius. Seriously, it's like giving steroids to food. The pie tastes unimaginably better if you just pair it up with some ice cream. And as I said before, it really takes the edge off in states where the temperature gets high. Number 16. Baked Alaska. Some diners kept this one for the show as much as the taste. It was sponge cake topped with a brick of Neapolitan ice cream, the whole thing covered in a thick coat of meringue, whipped into peaks and browned fast under high heat. The trick was that the meringue insulated the ice cream, so the outside went toasted and warm while the center stayed frozen solid, hot and cold on the same fork. In the 1960s, it was the dessert a diner wheeled out to make an ordinary night feel special, sometimes even flamed at the table for the regulars who wanted a spectacle. It looked like something from a fine hotel, plated right there off a two-lane road. But it took real skill and split-second timing, and a busy short-order kitchen could only fumble that so many times before giving up. As tastes turned simpler, the theater stopped being worth the trouble. The torched meringue dome disappeared from the dessert case, and with it went one of the diner's last bits of genuine drama. But frozen custard pie was once a winter marvel turned icy temperatures into culinary advantage, baked in unheated back porches where nature provided perfect refrigeration. Farmhouse wives mixed eggs, cream, sugar, and vanilla into custard filling, poured it into pie shells, and set them outside on December mornings where temperatures between 20 and 32 degrees created texture no icebox could match. The custard froze and evenly, developing ice crystals so fine the result was creamy over icy, smooth rather than grainy. Families served these pies at Christmas dinners and New Year celebrations, cutting thick slices that melted on the tongue. The pies stayed frozen for weeks on screened porches, protected from animals but exposed to cold that preserved them naturally. Children watched eagerly as mothers checked the pies, pressing gently to test firmness. In rural Wisconsin, Minnesota, and North Dakota, the 1800s and early 1900s, frozen custard pie represented winter abundance as cold weather could create luxury. The tradition faded as electric freezers arrived, but those who tasted these natural frozen desserts never forgot their delicate texture and pure flavor. Those who remember speak of textures impossible to recreate, winter's gift transformed into silk. How can we play the diner's greatest hits album and skip root beer floats? Arguably the most influential track on the whole project, this drink combined the spicy tang of root beer with a very smooth, thick scoop of vanilla ice cream, which led to it becoming one of the most popular items at diners and soda fountains. By the way, here's a bit of an unrelated cultural fact for you. While diner culture was popping off, so were soda fountains as an industry, so root beer floats all in all had every bit of support and momentum. They used that pretty well too. Otherwise, they wouldn't become the cultural phenomena they are today. Frank J. Wisner is the first person we can thank the root beer float for. He was the owner of Cripple Creek Brewing, and apparently he's the one who made the first root beer float. From there on, diners, bars, and ice cream parlors would perfect the technique to make a flawless float. Most agreed on one fundamental rule, which was that you really needed to nail the balance of vanilla ice cream and the root beer. Too much drink would take away from the texture of the ice cream, but too much ice cream would mess with the flavor of the drink. It was also family-friendly because it was just root beer. You could kind of drink with dad and mom that way, which meant that a lot of families used floats at diners as a nice little bonding experience. You know how you go to a Nando's and they have bottomless drinks? Well, some diners did that with floats back then, which made it even more successful. Number 19. Turkey croquettes. These were the diner cook's answer to the question of what to do with yesterday's bird. Shredded turkey got bound with a thick, starchy sauce, rolled into little cylinders, coated in breadcrumbs, and fried until the outside went deep golden. They came to the plate hot and crisp, usually with a spoonful of gravy and some peas alongside. Croquettes earned their place on diner menus during the Depression, when wasting a scrap of meat was unthinkable, and they held on through the war years when every kitchen learned to stretch protein as far as it would go. They were hearty, cheap, and a little bit fancy in the way fried food always feels fancy. But tastes moved on, and the chicken finger arrived to do the same job with less work and no leftover meat required. Kids wanted the strips, not the croquette. The shredded, sauced, breaded cylinder fell out of favor and off the board. Now it lives mostly in old church cookbooks and the memories of folks who ate it as children. Suet pudding was dense winter fuel, steamed for hours in cloth bags hung over kettles on wood stoves. Beef suet, the hard fat surrounding kidneys, was chopped fine and mixed with flour, dried fruit, molasses, and spices. The mixture was packed into floured cloths, tied tight, and suspended in boiling water until firm. After 3 or 4 hours, the pudding emerged solid and heavy, sliced thick and served hot with cream or hard sauce made from butter and sugar. The suet provided concentrated calories essential for surviving winter, each slice delivering lasting energy. In British immigrant communities' America's farmlands, suet pudding connected families to ancestral traditions while adapting to available ingredients. Women competed over whose pudding was lightest despite its density, whose spices were most balanced. The dessert appeared at Christmas dinners and winter celebrations, its richness marking special occasions. Children anticipated these puddings for weeks, knowing the dried fruits inside were rare treats during lean months. The tradition required patience and skill, careful timing, and temperature control. Christmas preparations began with suet pudding days early, the house filling with spice-scented steam that promised celebration abundance. Let's rewind to the early days of the 60s to find out what fueled the excitement. The 1960s were definitely a great time for a fried chicken bucket. You're really used to only seeing the best of these come from KFC and Wendy's now, but it was actually really common to pull up to a drive-in diner and get a neat bucket. They were first introduced in the 1950s, and it was a pretty straightforward concept for many diners. It really fit convenience food and car culture at the time. Both of those were mixing together, as in more Americans were choosing to get dinners they could eat in their car while moving around. It meant that there was a big focus on portability and convenience when restaurants decided their menus, because they wanted to prove to every customer that, hey, we have the best food around and it's also the easiest to eat. Sounds like a pretty good bottom line for us as eaters, right? It definitely was. Those buckets of the 60s lined with paper going for just $1 or $1.50 were an incredibly affordable and convenient option for people. Working-class families and teenagers in particular loved to get these. Places like California, Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas didn't just have a lot of teens around. They had a lot of car heads, too. It was filled with guys riding the high of their first car that they saved up months for. They were also known for their spicy kick because most buckets used Southern-style seasonings and breadings. In the Midwest, they were a little tamer because people there preferred comfort food, not really a challenge of your spice tolerance. It became a great family meal to have at home or in the car, and diners made twice as many buckets of money for every one bucket of chicken. Number 21. Salisbury steak. Here was a way to make ground beef feel like an occasion. The patty was seasoned, shaped oval so nobody mistook it for a hamburger, then smothered in brown gravy with onions and set beside a pile of mashed potatoes. It dated all the way back to a Civil War-era doctor named James Salisbury, who pushed ground beef as a cure for soldiers' stomach troubles. Diners adopted it in the mid-century because it was cheap, fast, and felt one step nicer than a plain burger patty. For a working family, it was a dignified dinner that did not break the bank. But the same dish that made diners proud got picked up by the frozen TV dinner companies, and suddenly Salisbury steak meant a sectioned aluminum tray heated in the oven. The name started to sound institutional, like cafeteria food or hospital food. Diners quietly let it slide off the menu rather than compete with the freezer aisle. Today it survives mostly as a punchline about old TV dinners. Crackling cornbread incorporated crispy pork skin bits throughout, adding richness to otherwise plain bread. Cracklings left from rendering lard were chopped and stirred into cornbread batter before baking with bread, with pockets of crispy, fatty pork throughout. The result was more substantial than plain cornbread, the pork fat making it tender while cracklings added texture. Farmhouse families ate this with beans, greens, or soups, the bread rich enough to serve as meals protein. In southern farmhouses, crackling cornbread represented thrift and flavor, using byproducts that enhanced rather than detracted. The cracklings distributed created pockets of flavor that made each bite slightly different, turning simple cornbread into something exciting that kept children asking for more portions. So by the 1960s, there were a lot of things going on in America culturally speaking. There was all this craze surrounding easy food, but there was also a lot of interest in exploring other cuisines and foreign taste palettes. Of course, since it is America, a mix of those two concepts was pretty inevitable. That's how drive-in pizza slices became really popular as a concept. The classic Italian slice was now something you would find at any roadside dinner, or, well, a cheap comfort food version of it. Restaurants like Pizza Hut and Shakey's Pizza also really popularized the idea of drive-in pizza slices. Hey, sometimes you don't feel like getting a whole pie. Sometimes you just wanted to share a few slices, and these were perfect for that. They were also pretty affordable. Most places sold them for around $0.15 to $0.35, and you could get pepperoni slices or even choose your toppings. A lot of people were some pretty die-hard fans of mushrooms, for example, and these even started giving some local pizzerias a headache because of the competition. Back then, you also had public movie setups where you could watch movies on projectors from the comfort of your car. Drive-in culture worked well with activities like that, and pizza slices were a pretty popular demand anyway for most diners. It was about time they got them on the menu, really. Number 14. The automat hot plate. This was a whole way of eating that has now completely vanished, and the numbers behind it are worth sitting with. The automat let you skip the counter entirely. You walked up to a wall of little glass-doored compartments, dropped your nickels into a slot, turned a chrome knob, and the door popped open with a hot plate of food waiting behind it. Macaroni and cheese, baked beans, chicken pot pie, a slab of meatloaf, all served by a wall instead of a waitress. Horn and Hardart ran the most famous of these, and at their peak in the late 1950s and early 1960s, they operated more than 165 locations across New York and Philadelphia. For a long stretch, a cup of their coffee cost exactly 1 nickel, poured from a brass dolphin head spout, and it stayed 5 cents until 1950, when they finally bumped it to 2 nickels. At their height, they were feeding hundreds of thousands of people a day, the largest restaurant operation in the world. The food behind those glass doors was real cooking too, made fresh in a commissary and trucked in, not the frozen stuff that came later. Then the fast food chains arrived with their drive-up windows and paper bags, and the whole idea of dropping coins into a wall started to feel like the past. Location after location went dark through the 1960s and 1970s. By the time the very last Horn and Hardart automat closed its doors in 1991, the format had been dead in spirit for years. A generation grew up never knowing you could feed a family from a wall of little windows, never hearing the clink of the nickels or the click of the chrome knob. The whole strange, wonderful machine vanished, and the hot plate behind the glass went with it. Parsnip fritters turned humble root vegetables into crispy winter treats, satisfied cravings for something beyond boiled or mashed. Parsnips stored in root cellars were grated raw, mixed with egg and flour, seasoned with salt and pepper, and fried in lard until golden brown. The exterior crisped while the interior stayed tender, the parsnip's natural sweetness caramelizing slightly. These fritters appeared at winter breakfasts and suppers, served alongside meat or eggs. In farmhouses where potatoes dominated winter meals, parsnips provided welcome variety, their sweeter flavor making them almost dessert-like. Children who refused plain boiled parsnips would eat these eagerly, the crispy coating making vegetables appealing. The frying fat added richness and calories essential for maintaining body heat during outdoor work. Mothers made large batches, feeding families of 8 or more from a single grating session. The tradition showed how preparation method could transform perception as nutritious food delicious. Parsnip fritters were economical, using vegetables that grew easily and stored well. Modern grocery stores offer convenience but lost connection to seasons, to foresight, to the satisfaction of eating food prepared months before through family effort. Sloppy Joes aren't just a catchy buzzword you hear in shows set in retro times, but a real showstopper that's been associated with drive-in diner culture for years and years. Not just that, since we're specifically talking about the 1960s, it was even common for people to find this as a cafeteria item in schools. It erupted most in the 50s and 60s, where there was a lot of demand for easy-to-make casual meals that worked better in social settings or as comfort food. You know, the kind of stuff you can munch on and have a good conversation with your friends at the same time. The reason Sloppy Joes became so popular, not just in drive-in diners but as a food to make at home too, was because they used a lot of convenience ingredients like canned food, which were really cheap and easy to make. You had your sauces in a bottle, some spices if you were making it at home, and everything else in a can. So, what really were you cooking? It was more assembling a meal together than any actual kind of effort. That's what made them work so well for diners too, because production was a cakewalk when it was this easy to make a Sloppy Joe. Number 24, liver and onions. Walk into a roadside diner in 1965, and this was the plate that filled the room with that deep, iron-rich smell. Beef liver, dusted and seasoned, laid across a flat-top griddle next to a heap of onions cooked down until they turned soft and sweet. A few strips of bacon went on top for the regulars who knew to ask. It was cheap protein that stuck to your ribs, the kind of meal a man ordered after a long haul because it felt like real food. Doctors used to push it too, calling it good for the blood. But American tastes turned hard against organ meat as the decades rolled on. Younger eaters wanted a clean burger, not something that reminded them of the slaughterhouse. The griddle stopped getting that order, and the cooks stopped prepping it. Today, most folks under 60 have never tasted it once, and the smell that used to mean dinner is gone from the counter for good. Mock apple pie made from crackers fooled nobody but tasted good. Depression-era innovation that created fruit pie flavor from Ritz crackers and lemon juice. The crackers were broken into pie crust, covered with syrup made from sugar, water, cream of tartar, and lemon, then baked until bubbling. The result did taste surprisingly like apple pie, the crackers softening into something fruit-like while spices provided familiar flavor. Farmhouse families made this during winter when preserved apples ran out but craving for pie remained. The recipe represented American ingenuity and the willingness to create pleasure from whatever was available. Depression-era necessity became family story told with mixture of pride and humor, as how hardship created ingenuity that sometimes succeeded in creating pleasure from pantry basics when nothing else remained. You know, we mentioned burgers, fried chicken, shakes, and even pies, but there's still one more member of the original crew we're missing: onion rings. Just like you can't have a Transformers movie without Bumblebee, you can't get a diner going if you don't know how to make onion rings. The earliest recipe I could find for onion rings was actually from a 1933 New York Times article, which was a pretty basic recipe. The classic onion ring evolved into ditching cornmeal later on, but the 1933 one had a lot of the stuff in the batter. Right after 1933, it didn't really take long for onion rings to become another must-have fast food item if you were going for a main meal like a burger. The thing about fast food is that a lot of it is built around one item. You get a burger or you get fried chicken. Okay, so you obviously need sides and a drink, right? So what if you only have fries? Gets a bit stale eventually. You switch it up with golden crisp onion rings worth barely a meager 25 cents, and whether you're in Texas or California, you can always trust in the quality. Chains like Dairy Queen had some of the best onion rings around, and drive-ins and diners would do promotional meals centered around onion rings, such as combo baskets or side swap Wednesdays, which let customers swap between either fries as a side or onion rings. Deals really go a long way, you know. Number 23, the open-faced hot turkey sandwich. This was the plate you pointed at when somebody 2 stools down got theirs first. White bread, a mound of sliced turkey, the whole thing drowned in gravy so thick you ate it with a fork instead of your hands. A scoop of mashed potatoes leaned against one side, and the gravy ran over everything until the bread underneath dissolved into something closer to stuffing. The open-faced sandwich got its start in Pittsburgh back in the 1930s, and diners across the country grabbed it because it stretched leftover roast turkey into a hot, filling special. It carried that Sunday dinner feeling on a regular Tuesday. But the hot sandwich asked for real roasted meat and a pot of scratch gravy, and as kitchens cut corners, that became too much trouble. Cold deli turkey on a roll was faster and cheaper. The fork and knife version slipped off the board, and most diners today would not know how to plate it. Salt pork and cabbage stew filled farmhouse kettles January and February, when fresh meat was scarce and gardens lay buried. Thick slabs of salt pork, preserved in barrels since autumn butchering, were cut into chunks and rendered slowly until fat ran clear and meat turned golden. Cabbage heads stored in root cellars joined the pot, cut into wedges softened for hours. Potatoes, onions, and sometimes turnips added substance, while the pork fat created richness that coated everything. The stew simmered on wood stoves from morning until supper time, filling houses with savory steam. Families ate it with cornbread or biscuits, sopping up the salty broth that provided essential calories for outdoor winter work. In farmhouses across the Midwest and Northeast, this stew represented survival cuisine, stretching preserved meat to feed large families through the coldest months. The salt pork's intense flavor meant a little went far, as it economical as well as nourishing. Children grew up associating this stew with deep snow and howling winds, comfort food that warmed from the inside. The tradition faded as refrigeration made fresh meat available year-round. Grandmothers who made this knew precisely how much salt pork created richness without overwhelming cabbage's natural sweetness throughout long simmering. Fried shrimp baskets were an American drive-in staple, especially in areas of the Midwest and South where there was a large fishing industry. Coastal cities with drive-ins thrived off of these the most, and where lots of people in the East Coast had their fried chicken buckets, a lot of people in the South enjoyed these shrimp ones instead. Shrimp was always a part of seafood tradition in America, as was fishing, so it was a taste that had already settled into the population well enough. Diners and drive-ins throughout the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic never shied away from showing off their shrimp bucket skills, and each had their own promotions like Shrimp Sunday or price cuts going on. In other words, competition was pretty healthy, and who benefits the most off of that? Foodies like you and me, my good friend. I don't know about you, but I would really like to go back to the days where a fried shrimp bucket was something I could easily afford. I mean, at just $150, that's a pretty big steal. Off the top of my head, though, you could get it even cheaper in some states like Florida and Louisiana. Number 15. Ambrosia salad. This was the Sunday favorite no chain ever bothered to copy. It came together cold in a big bowl, mandarin oranges and pineapple and shredded coconut folded into sweetened whipped cream, with marshmallows tossed in once the factories started making them cheap in the 1950s. Some cooks added a handful of pecans or a few maraschino cherries for color. It rode the line between salad and dessert and never picked a side, which was exactly the charm. Diners ladled it out alongside the meat and three on weekends, a soft, sweet, cloud-like scoop that felt like a treat without costing the kitchen much. It tasted like church potlucks and family reunions and a slower kind of Sunday. But it was fussy to keep fresh and entirely homemade, and no national chain ever saw the point of putting it through a commissary. So while burgers and fries got mass-produced and shipped everywhere, ambrosia stayed a local, hand-mixed thing. When those independent counters closed, it simply left with them. Head cheese wasn't cheese at all, but jellied meat from hog heads, made during winter butchering when cold weather preserved everything. After autumn hog killing, heads were boiled for hours until meat fell from bone and liquid turned gelatinous from natural collagen. The meat was chopped, seasoned with vinegar, pepper, and herbs, then poured into pans where winter cold set it firm. The result was sliceable loaves with meat suspended in clear jelly, eaten cold with bread and mustard. In German and Eastern European farmhouse communities, head cheese represented thrift. Using parts would otherwise be wasted. Families stored the loaves in unheated pantries where they stayed fresh for weeks. The texture was unique, tender meat in firm jelly that melted slightly at room temperature. Some cooks added pickles or onions to the mixture with variations that reflected family preference. Head cheese appeared at winter breakfasts and lunches, providing protein when other meat was being rationed for future meals. The tradition taught that nothing from the hog should be discarded, that skill could transform scraps into delicacy. Skilled butchers took pride in their head cheese, knowing proper seasoning and perfect gel distinguished excellent cooks from merely competent ones' communities. Number 25. Chicken a la king. There was a time you could not sit down at a diner counter without seeing this one chalked on the board. It was chicken and mushrooms folded into a warm white sauce, ladled over toast points until the bread went soft underneath. Cooks built it from whatever the breakfast rush left behind. A little pimento for color, a splash of sherry if the owner was feeling generous. It walked a strange line, fancy enough for a society banquet, cheap enough for a trucker on a budget. They even served it at President Nixon's birthday spread, which tells you how far it had traveled. But by the late 1960s, the shine was already coming off. Frozen versions hit grocery freezers, and the homemade kind started to feel like something your aunt made, not something worth ordering out. The diners that kept it going did so out of habit more than demand. Now, you would be hard-pressed to find a single counter in America still spooning it over toast. Turnip and potato mash combined two root cellar staples into side dish that stretched limited supplies. Turnips and potatoes were boiled together until soft, mashed with butter and milk until creamy, seasoned with salt and pepper. The turnips added slight bitterness that balanced potatoes' blandness with more interesting flavor than either alone. Farmhouse families ate this alongside meat or as main dish when meat was scarce, the combination providing nutrition and satisfaction. In communities where potatoes dominated winter meals, turnips provided variety while remaining economical. Economic necessity created this combination initially, but cooks discovered that limitations often produced better results than abundance, forcing creativity that improved flavor rather than merely economizing on ingredients. If you ever stopped at a Howard Johnson's, you already know none of these meals are coming back, but you can still make some of them at home this week. Broil a piece of cod with butter and breadcrumbs. Try a cheese dream under the broiler. Grill a hot dog in real butter and see if it takes you somewhere. Tell me in the comments which Howard Johnson's meal you miss the most and whether you ever tried to make one at home. If this is your first time here, subscribe for more forgotten American food. Until next time, this is Vintage Lifestyle USA.